The coin bearing the inscription, Elizabeth II Day, Gratia Regina Fid Def, 2 shillings, 1956, is a British pre-decimal silver-colored coin, commonly known as a florin, issued during the reign of Elizabeth II. The Latin legend Dei Gratia Regina Fid Def translates to by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith, a traditional royal style used on British coinage for centuries. The 2 shillings florin denomination was originally introduced in 1849 as part of an early attempt to decimalize British currency, since it represented 1/10 of a pound. There were 20 shillings in 1 pound. By 1956, when this particular coin was struck, Britain was still using the pre-decimal system. 12 pence made 1 shilling, and 20 shillings made 1 pound. The 1956 2 shillings coin was minted during the early years of Elizabeth II's reign, which began in 1952 after the death of her father, George VI. Her portrait appearing on the coin is the first definitive coinage portrait created by sculptor Mary Gillick. This youthful effigy shows the queen uncrowned, wearing a laurel wreath, facing right. The initials MG for Mary Gillick appear subtly on the truncation of the neck. This portrait was used on British circulating coinage from 1953 until 1967 and is highly regarded for its elegant simplicity and classical influence. The obverse inscription reads, Elizabeth II Day, Gratia Regina F. Laughing Face : with abbreviated Latin titles spaced around the portrait. On the reverse side of the 1956 florin appears a crowned cruciform arrangement of emblems representing the nations of the United Kingdom. The Tudor rose for England, the thistle for Scotland, the shamrock for Ireland, and the leek for Wales. At the center is a rose, and the entire design is topped with a royal crown. The denomination 2 shillings and the date 1956 appear around the design. This reverse design was created by British artist Edgar Fuller, often credited as Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas for earlier adaptations, reflecting traditional heraldic symbolism and unity within the kingdom. In terms of specifications, the 1956 2 shillings coin was struck in cupronickel rather than silver. Prior to 1947, British florins contained 50% silver, but due to post-World War II economic pressures and rising silver prices, the composition was changed to a copper-nickel alloy, 75% copper, 25% nickel. The coin weighs approximately 11.31 grams, has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters, and features a reeded, milled edge. It was produced at the Royal Mint in London. The total mintage for the 1956 florin was in the tens of millions, as it was a standard circulation coin used in everyday transactions across the United Kingdom and throughout parts of the British Commonwealth. Historically, the florin held purchasing power roughly equivalent to what would be about 10 new pence after decimalization in 1971, though its actual buying power in 1956 would have been significantly greater than 10p today due to inflation. In 1956, Britain was still adjusting to post-war recovery under Prime Minister Anthony Eden, and later that year leadership passed to Harold Macmillan following the Suez Crisis. Coins like the 2 shillings circulated widely during this transformative period in British political and economic history. The inscription Fid Def stands for Fidei Defensor, meaning Defender of the Faith, a title originally granted to King Henry VIII by Pope Leo X in 1521 and retained by British monarchs even after the English Reformation. Its continued appearance on coins symbolizes the sovereign's constitutional role as supreme governor of the Church of England. The use of Latin on coinage reflects long-standing European numismatic tradition, lending continuity and gravitas to royal authority. From a collector's perspective, the 1956 2 shillings coin is common and generally affordable in circulated condition. Values typically depend on condition, grade. In worn condition, it may be worth only a small premium over face value. Historically, while uncirculated examples with original mint luster can command higher prices among numismatists. Proof versions were also struck for collectors, featuring sharper detail and mirror-like surfaces, though these are less common than standard circulation strikes. Because it is made of cupronickel, The coin does not have intrinsic silver value like earlier florins dated 1946 or earlier. The florin denomination itself has an interesting legacy. After decimalization on February 15, 1971, known as Decimal Day, the florin continued to circulate as a 10-pence coin because its size and value were equivalent to 1/10 of a pound. It remained legal tender until it was eventually withdrawn in 1993 when the smaller 10p coin was introduced. Thus, a 1956 2 shillings coin technically remained spendable in the UK for nearly 4 decades after it was minted. In summary, the Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def 2 shillings 1956 coin represents an important piece of mid-20th century British monetary history. It features the first portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Mary Gillick, traditional heraldic symbolism on its reverse, and reflects Britain's pre-decimal currency system. Though common in numismatic markets today, it remains historically significant as a tangible artifact from the early years of Elizabeth II's long reign and from a pivotal era in British history. The inscription, Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def 2 shillings 1962, appears on a British coin issued during the reign of Elizabeth II, and it reflects both royal titles and the denomination of the currency used in the United Kingdom before decimalization. This particular coin is the 2 shillings, commonly known as the florin, struck in 1962 as part of the pre-decimal British monetary system that existed prior to 1971. At that time, British currency was based on pounds, shillings, s, and pence d, where 1 pound equaled 20 shillings and 1 shilling equaled 12 pence, making a 2 shillings coin worth 1/10 of a pound. The Latin inscription Dei Gratia Regina FID Def translates to by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. Elizabeth II identifies the monarch as Queen Elizabeth II. Dei Gratia means by the grace of God, a traditional phrase asserting the divine right of monarchs. Regina means queen, and FID Def is the abbreviated form of Fidei Defensor, meaning defender of the faith, a title originally granted to King Henry VIII in 1521 and retained by subsequent British sovereigns. The 1962 2 shillings coin was minted by the Royal Mint and features a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. The portrait used on the 1962 issue is the first definitive coin portrait of Elizabeth II, designed by sculptor Mary Gillick. Her design depicts a young queen uncrowned, wearing a laurel wreath, symbolizing classical Roman imagery and continuity of tradition. This portrait was used on British coins from 1953 until 1967. Around the portrait runs the inscription Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def, identifying the sovereign and her titles in Latin. The reverse of the 1962 florin displays a crowned Tudor rose at the center, flanked by a thistle and shamrock, representing England, Scotland, and Ireland respectively, with the denomination 2 shillings and the date 1962 inscribed. The design was created by Edgar Fuller, commonly credited as Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas in earlier issues, though the standard florin reverse during this period featured the crowned rose design. Historically, the florin was first introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria as part of early efforts to decimalize British currency, since it represented 1/10 of a pound. By 1962, the coin was composed of cupronickel, 75% copper and 25% nickel, having changed from its earlier silver composition after 1947 due to rising silver costs following World War II. The coin weighs approximately 11.31 grams and measures 28.5 millimeters in diameter, making it one of the larger circulating coins of the era. The edge of the coin is milled, reeded, which historically helped prevent clipping of precious metal from coin edges when coins were made of silver or gold. Millions of 1962 florins were struck for circulation, as Britain was experiencing economic growth and increasing commercial activity during the post-war period. Because of the high mintage, the 1962 2 shillings coin is generally common today and typically holds modest collector value, unless found in exceptionally high grade or or proof condition. The year 1962 places the coin within a significant period of British history. Queen Elizabeth II had ascended to the throne in 1952 following the death of her father, King George VI. The early 1960s were marked by modernization and cultural change in Britain, sometimes referred to as the beginning of the swinging 60s. The coin therefore represents both traditional monarchy, through its Latin inscriptions and heraldic symbols, and a nation gradually transitioning toward modern economic reforms. Less than a decade after this coin's issue, the United Kingdom officially decimalized its currency on February 15, 1971, known as Decimal Day. At that time, the florin, 2 shillings, was revalued as 10 new pence and continued to circulate alongside decimal coins until it was eventually withdrawn in 1993. In summary, the Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def 2 shillings 1962 coin is a pre-decimal British florin issued during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, minted by the Royal Mint, bearing the first coinage portrait of the Queen by Mary Gillick and a heraldic floral reverse symbolizing the unity of the United Kingdom. Its Latin legend expresses the monarch's traditional titles, while its denomination reflects the old pounds, shillings, pence system that defined British commerce for centuries. Though common in circulation grade, it remains historically meaningful as a tangible artifact of mid-20th century Britain and the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II, connecting royal heritage, economic history, and numismatic tradition in one enduring piece of currency, the next top. The coin inscribed Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def 2 shillings 1965 is a pre-decimal British silver-colored coin issued during the reign of Elizabeth II. The Latin legend Dei Gratia Regina FID Def translates to by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith, a traditional royal title used on British coinage for centuries. The year 1965 places this coin in a later period of Britain's pre-decimal currency system, which operated before the major monetary reform of 1971 known as Decimal Day. At that time, British currency was structured in pounds, shillings, and pence. 1 pound equaled 20 shillings, and 1 shilling equaled 12 pence, meaning 2 shillings, also called a florin, represented 1/10 of a pound. The florin denomination was first introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria as an early step toward decimalization, since its value conveniently equaled 1/10 of a pound. By 1965, the florin had become a familiar coin in everyday British commerce, widely used in transactions, wages, and retail pricing. The obverse front of the 1965 2 shillings coin features the youthful portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing right. This particular effigy is known as the first portrait or Mary Gillick portrait, designed by sculptor Mary Gillick. It was introduced in 1953 following Elizabeth II's coronation and remained in use on British coinage until 1967. The portrait shows the Queen without a crown, wearing a laurel wreath, symbolizing classical Roman imagery and continuity of monarchy. Surrounding the portrait is the Latin inscription Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def, affirming her sovereign authority. The lettering is clean and elegant, reflecting mid-20th century British minting standards. The reverse back of a 1965 florin displays a crowned rose at the center, flanked by a thistle on one side and a shamrock on the other, symbolizing England, Scotland, and Ireland respectively. This floral emblem design was created by the heraldic artist Edgar and was first introduced in 1953. The words 2 shillings appear below the design, with the date 1965 beneath. In terms of specifications, the 1965 2 shillings coin was struck in cupronickel, an alloy composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel. Earlier florins, before 1947, contained silver, but rising silver prices led to the removal of precious metal from circulating British coins. The coin weighs approximately 11.31 grams and measures about 28.5 millimeters in diameter, making it relatively large compared to modern coins. It has a reeded, milled edge, which historically helped prevent clipping or shaving of precious metal from coins. The coin was minted at the Royal Mint in London, which later relocated to Llantrisant, Wales in 1968. Millions of these coins were produced for circulation in 1965, making them common rather than rare today. Because of the high mintage, most surviving examples have modest numismatic value unless found in uncirculated or proof condition. The year 1965 itself was an interesting period in British history. The country was under the government of Prime Minister Harold Wilson, and Britain was undergoing social and economic transformation during the post-war era. Although the coin predates decimalization, it was part of the gradual modernization of the currency system that culminated in 1971, when the florin was redesignated as the 10-pence coin and continued to circulate with the same size and value in a new decimal system until it was eventually replaced by a smaller 10p coin in 1992. From a collector's perspective, the 1965 Elizabeth II 2 shillings coin is valued primarily for its historical and symbolic importance rather than rarity. In circulated condition, it is typically worth only slightly above face value when converted historically, but uncirculated examples or coins with exceptional luster can command higher prices among collectors of British pre-decimal coinage. Proof versions, struck with specially prepared dies for collectors, are more desirable. The coin represents the final era of traditional British currency before the sweeping decimal reform, and thus holds nostalgic appeal for those interested in mid-20th century British history. Its floral reverse design also reflects the unity of the United Kingdom's constituent nations under the Crown, making it emblematic of British identity during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Overall, the 1965 2 shillings coin stands as a tangible artifact of Britain's monetary heritage, combining classical royal portraiture, heraldic symbolism, and practical everyday function in a single enduring piece of metal the next top. The coin inscribed Elizabeth II Day, Gratia Regina Fid Def. 2 shillings 1967 is a significant piece of 20th century British numismatic history, representing one of the final issues of the traditional pre-decimal British currency system before the United Kingdom adopted decimalization in 1971. This coin was issued during the reign of Elizabeth II, who ascended the throne in 1952 and whose portrait appeared on British coinage for 7 decades. The Latin inscription Dei Gratia Regina Fid Def translates to "By the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith." Dei Gratia emphasizes the monarch's divine right to rule. Regina means queen, and Fid Def is short for Fidei Defensor, a title originally granted in 1521 by Pope Leo X to King Henry VIII and retained by English and later British monarchs even after the Reformation. By 1967, Britain was preparing for major economic and monetary reforms, and this particular year marked the last circulation issue of the 2 shilling coin before decimal currency was introduced. Under the old system, £1 sterling equaled 20 shillings, and each shilling equaled 12 pence, making 2 shillings equal to 24 pence in pre-decimal terms. After decimalization in 1971, the 2 shilling coin was equivalent in value to 10 new pence and continued to circulate for a time as a 10p coin because its size and value aligned closely with a new decimal 10p piece. The 1967 2 shillings coin, often referred to colloquially as a florin, features on its obverse the second portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by the sculptor Arnold Machin. This portrait shows the Queen wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, facing right, and is surrounded by the abbreviated Latin legend naming her titles. Machin's effigy was introduced in 1968 for some coins, but the 1967 florin actually carries the earlier portrait by Mary Gillick, which depicts a young, uncrowned queen wearing a laurel wreath, symbolizing youth and classical elegance. The reverse of the coin displays a crowned Tudor rose at the center, flanked by a thistle and shamrock, representing England, Scotland, and Ireland respectively. This floral arrangement symbolizes the unity of the nations within the United Kingdom. Above the design appears the denomination 2 shillings, and below it the date 1967. The design is simple yet heraldically rich, reflecting traditional British symbolism. The coin was struck in cupronickel, 75% copper, 25% nickel. As silver had been removed from most circulating British coinage after 1947 due to post-war economic pressures and the rising cost of precious metals. The coin weighs approximately 11.31 grams and measures about 28.5 millimeters in diameter, with a milled, reeded edge. Historically, the florin denomination was first introduced in 1849 during the reign of Queen Victoria as part of an early attempt to decimalize British currency, since the florin was worth 1/10 of a pound. The experiment in decimal thinking ultimately failed at the time, but the florin remained in circulation for over a century. By the 1960s, Britain's currency system was considered complex and outdated compared to the simpler decimal systems used in many other countries. The government announced plans in 1966 to convert to decimal currency, and coins like the 1967 Two Shillings were minted in very large quantities to ensure sufficient supply during the transition. Indeed, 1967 florins were struck in the tens of millions, making them common today and typically modest in market value unless found in exceptional uncirculated condition. Because 1967 was the last year of issue before decimalization preparations intensified, it holds special interest for collectors as the last of the old florins. From a numismatic perspective, collectors evaluate the 1967 Two Shillings coin based on condition, strike quality, and luster. Circulated examples often show wear on the Queen's hair and facial features and on the high points of the rose petals. Uncirculated coins retain original mint luster and sharp details. There were no silver proofs for circulation in 1967, but specimen and proof sets were produced for collectors. The coin was minted at the Royal Mint, which by that time was transitioning operations from London to Llantriston in Wales, though most 1967 issues were struck in London. The absence of a mint mark is typical for Royal Mint issues of that period intended for domestic circulation. Culturally, the 1967 Two Shilling coin represents a snapshot of Britain during the swinging 60s, a time of social transformation, economic challenge, and cultural innovation. The year 1967 itself was notable globally for events such as the Summer of Love in the United States and major geopolitical developments during the Cold War. In Britain, it was a period of modernization under Prime Minister Harold Wilson. The coins people carried in their pockets, like this 2 shilling piece, were tangible symbols of continuity amid change. Within just 4 years, on February 15, 1971, Decimal Day, the centuries-old system of pounds, shillings, and pence was officially replaced with a decimal structure of 100 new pence to the pound. Interestingly, because the florin already represented 1/10 of a pound, it transitioned smoothly into the decimal era as the 10p coin until it was eventually reduced in size in 1992, at which point the larger earlier pieces were withdrawn. In terms of value today, a 1967 Two Shillings coin in circulated condition is generally worth only a small premium over face value. If exchanged before demonetization deadlines, or a modest collectible value, often just a few pounds depending on condition. Brilliant uncirculated examples or coins in original mint sets may command higher prices among collectors, but due to the high mintage, it is not considered rare. However, its historical and educational value is significant, especially for those interested in British monetary history, the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, or the transition from traditional to decimal currency. The inscriptions, heraldic emblems, and material composition together make the coin a compact artifact of British heritage. For many older Britons, it evokes nostalgia for the pre-decimal era when everyday transactions involved mental arithmetic with shillings and pence. For younger generations and international collectors, it serves as a reminder of how currency systems evolve alongside political, economic, and cultural shifts. Thus, the Elizabeth II Day Gratia Regina FID Def 2 Shillings 1967 coin is far more than a simple piece of metal. It is a historical document in miniature, linking centuries of monarchical tradition with the modernizing reforms of the late 20th century United Kingdom.